Wow.
Dari kota Yogyakarta, inilah Borobudur Writers and Cultural Festival 2022 dengan tema Membaca Ulang Pemikiran Haryani Santiko, Durga di Jawa, Bali, dan India.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Rahayu. Sugeng siang, Mugyo Sadoyo Amangyo ing katentreman. Again, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I feel delighted to be a part of such an authoritative, cultural, literary, and art forum today. I am Sahid Teguh Widodo from Javanologi Institute, Universitas Sebelas Maret, Surakarta. I will attend the general lecture with you from Professor Stephen Headley. Halo Prof. Headley, apa kabar? Prof. Headley is the real guru, social anthropologist, the priest of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and a well-known writer with work published in English and French. And in addition, he is also renowned as an ethnographer. Dr. Stephen Headley, born on August 5, 1943, in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, earned his BA in Oriental Studies, Chinese and Sanskrit from Columbia University in 1956. He earned his Magister of Art in Buddhist Studies from Columbia University in 1969 and continued his studies in Paris with a diploma in Sanskrit philology at the École Pratique des Hautes Études 1972 and a doctorate in social anthropology in 1979. He also studied theology at the Saint Vladimir Orthodox Theology Seminary, Crestwood, New York, 1966 to 1969, and the Saint Sergius Institute of Orthodox Theology in Paris between 1969 to 1973. He worked at the French National Center for Scientific Research between 1981 to 2008, and around 1973 to 2005, Professor Headley repeatedly conducted field research in Central Java, especially in the village of Krendowahono. Very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, in this forum, Borobudur Writers and Cultural Festival Forum 2022, Prof. Headley, the author of book Durga, Mosque, Cosmology, Conversion, and Community in Central Javanese Islam, will present material about the remains of Durga worship and diachronic analysis. How the remains of worshipping Durga since ancient times are still permitted today in the daily rituals of Javanese tradition in the villages and villages of Java. He will convey material about his experience around the Mahesa Lawung ceremony and the phenomena of certainly interesting extents of Devi Durga. Okay, it would not wise for me to talk too much, and it might be a wasted time. We can't wait to take part in Professor Headley general lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, the sequence of events in this afternoon general lecture are: I open and read the CV. It will be continued by Prof. Headley presentation through video recording for about 20 minutes. You can write your question directly in the Zoom chat box. After that, the discussion session will be continued with a question and answer session, which will be directly answered by Prof. Headley, perhaps until 12:30 p.m. The event will be closed by moderator, of course until 12:40 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, okay, let us join Professor Headley delivering the general lecture matter. Thank you. Prof. Headley, please, the time and place is yours. Please, Prof.
Good afternoon. I am Stephen Headley, a social anthropologist from France, and I'm speaking to you from Solo. It's very interesting to hear all these very good presentations about Mahesa Lawung, and I'll present you a sketch of Mahesa Lawung from the village level looking up. 50 years ago, in 1973, when I was living in the village of Krendowahono, near Durga's Punden, north of Solo, I asked if the cult of Durga was still active. I could see people coming on their own to pray for Ziyarah at the Punden, but were the Solo palaces still involved? Since I first took an interest in Durga, Javanese rituals have changed a lot. When an ancient ritual or myth is made into a film, like those concerning Lorokidu, the queen of the southern seas, Durga's southern counterpart, anthropologists call this dislodging. By this, they mean that the narration becomes a scenario, taken completely out of its natural setting. Another way of witnessing these changes is to see how they're commoditized to fit into a package for domestic Javanese tourism. In Krendowahono, the spectacle before Durga's Pundan has become more elaborate, better costumes, more offerings, etc. It has also, of course, been photographed for more publicity. At Gunung Kumukos, to the north of an old myth concerning the elopement of the legendary prince Pangeran Samudra, son of a Javanese king, and his stepmother, Nyai Ontrawuro, now involves prostitutes in what is dubbed ritual sex. Although when I went there 30 years ago, there was already some evidence of prostitutes, now the site has been developed commercially, and that even by the Kabupaten. At Tawanmangu on Mount Lawung, the old Punden, not Chandi Cheta or Chandi Sewu, were not much frequented decades ago. Now, it is totally eclipsed by an amusement park near the Pasar with a miniature Eiffel Tower and a London Bridge. Domestic tourism is transformative. Contemporary sociology of tourism in Central Java reveals a crisis of representation. The role of representation is essential to almost all aspects of sociability. We are all familiar with the concept of representative governments. But when I use the term representation here, I mean something more fundamental, how the other is imagined to be represented in the mind of a cultural agent. Is the isolated individual really the privileged knower of reality? Today, nearly everywhere representation is understood as that process of making present an absent object or person as an image in one's mind. To study the Mahesa Lawung Pundan, we need to know what the Mahesa Lawung once was. The kerbau spearing offered by the Mangkunegaran with Sajen was prepared in the palace of the Buku, supervised by the Gondoroso and the Abdi Dalam Soronoto. It has an iconography already 1,000 years old in Java. There are famous statues of Durga's spearing of the demonic Mahesa buffalo. The most beautiful one is from Singasari in the 13th century iconographic tradition that now is in the Marx Museum in Leiden. An even earlier statue is to be found in Prambanan. A Durga Mahesa Mardani, Slayer of Mahesa, is also to be found in the Rajapustika Museum in Solo, and it may once have been at the Pundan in Krendowahono. Such an iconographic history is too long to be unraveled here. The word Mahesa today in Java may still mean tombstone, but it also designates in Kromo a kerbau, a buffalo. Why so? In Indian mythology, Mahesa was the demonic enemy of Durga. The gods were unable to vanquish it, so Durga was created out of the god Shakti in order to do so. This appearance, sadhana, of Durga was not an avatara. There are different versions of this battle, the most famously recited from the poem of the Devi Mahatmya. On the east coast of South India in Mahabalipuram, the Pallava dynasty port city, the 3rd to the 9th century, there were maritime contacts with Java and Sumatra. Possibly the tantric elements of the cult here stem from their 8th century rituals. But the earliest proto-representation of such as female ogres, Durga, goes back to the Harappa civilization in the Indus Valley. To produce this warrior goddess mythologically and ritually may involve one of many variants both in India and in Southeast Asia. In local village rituals, both in India and in Borneo, kerbau were attached to stone pillars, yupa, to be sacrificed on the occasion of rituals of purification and feasts with the ancestors. Just as in Java elsewhere, local rituals for Durga were constantly changing. Madeleine Biardot has shown in her 1989 book, The Story of the Posts, that not only do rituals evolve, but also their mythology. A clue is given in the toponym of Krendowahono, which is the Sanskrit name of an incident in the first book of the Mahabharata. In the Indian Markandeya Purana and in the Devi Mahatya, the burning of this forest is treated quite differently. Indian cosmology places Durga battle with the demonic Mahesa at the end of the 4 epochs, but not at the end of the 4th Yuga in the Vanaparva, when the Krendowahono is burned down by Agni. In the Mahabharata, this resembles an apocalypse, a reabsorption, pralaya, of the cosmos. This apocalyptic dimension of the Krendowahono forest is not present in the Javanese story of the victory of Durga over the demonic buffalo. But local newspapers in Solo try to make sense of it all using whatever materials they can lay their hands on. So it is popularly assumed that the local Raja wanted to assimilate Durga's victory with their own kingdom's prosperity. But is that true? Perhaps the best place to verify their intention is to look at the prayers that are cited when the offering is presented. Some are Muslim, Arabic. The older ones are in Javanese. The latter, in fact, cosmogonies, now used as prayers in Hutan purification rituals. This is at first sight surprising, but it seems to be related to the effort to renew the person afflicted by Surakarta or Gul. In any event, they bear no direct relation to the victory of Durga over Mahesa. Such apparent obscurity is not seen a problem, as the invocations are well guarded in texts that are shown to no one. So to get a complete picture of Durga's cult would take us very far back in time and deep into Indian cosmologies, not to mention other areas, Java, Borneo. In Balinese rituals, one finds hymns called stotra to Durga under a variety of names, Kali, Kalibhadra, Chamuna, and this is well explained in Gudrian in Horkis's 1971 book. To follow up on these would be to lose sight of our topic, a ritual in Central Java, whose geography is complex enough, as we will show here below. In the second part of my talk, I'd like to give you some suggestions as to what is the ritual mindset of Javanese. And for this, I will use a certain number of diagrams, which I hope will be clear to you. Traces of the sacred, Patilasan, follow complex paths, which we will sketch out here below before returning to the Lawung ritual itself. The terms for ritual are themselves ambiguous. That is to say, they change if the context becomes out of place in the Javanese mindset. By semantic pivoting and reversal, the ritual values change, as we can see in the diagram below. This is the first diagram. On the left, you see two-tone as opposed to multicolored, and left and right, you see black as opposed to white. But if there is a change of semantics, these values will move, will pivot. In the second diagram below, we see what kind of changes take place. At the top, you have terms for two-toned, several terms: spotted, striped, checkered, halved, streaked, opposed to multicolored, machawarna, warna. This is displayed at crossroads and in the fifth Pasarande Kliwan. Now, for instance, the top terms, the two-tone terms, they can move if the context is changed to become black, dirty, Surakarta, or blemished. And the same terms can move off to a more positive context, albino, tree, and associated with Guru Shiva. So the opposition between sacred and neutral, between good and bad, is not fixed. The geography is never local, as the geography of the following two diagrams below will show. their location is thought of as involving a pairing or a triadic juxtaposition. In the first part of the diagram, 3, we have ambivalent spirits of the Javanese pantheon, local ancestors and village protectors, who are juxtaposed to Islamic figures, Shantri, Wali, angels, prophets, Muhammad, and Allah. And this kind of encompassment of one over the other varies if you're in the village mindset or if you're in a royal palace mindset. The encompassment is different. Now, in our fourth diagram, the geography becomes more obvious. To the north, you have Durga's forest palace. To the south, you have Lora Kidul, the queen of the southern seas, underwater palace. And in the middle, you have Pakabuwana and Shri's palace in Surakarta. Now, to the north, we found Durga as an invisible form, a beautiful princess, a terrifying warrior. The offerings made there consist of all kinds of animal, raw and cooked, a complete meal. But as for spouses, they might be captured as suitors for the dais, for the goddess. In the south, we have Lora Kidu, who is also an invisible form, a beautiful or elderly princess, or a snake. The offerings made there are wedding clothes of green and yellow color, and her spouse is the current Pakabubona, currently often called simply Sunan. Now, in the middle, the Kasusanan's palace, where Shri is installed on the ritual bed in the center of the throne room, you have visible statues, Shri and Sadhana, facing the Sunan. Offerings are made there on Tuesday night. Lora Kidul, of course, remains invisible. The offerings made there in the center of the palace before the regalia of the king on Lora Kidul's ritual bed. Spouses are descendable, the spouses, descendable elderly sister of Shri. Now let's be more general, this might be easier to understand. In the fifth diagram, if we work from the highest level of generality, we know that there are cosmogonic myths, many different ones. These give rise to cosmogonic maps, which are levels of landscape. Within these levels of landscape, there are tables of correspondences relating time and space, which are pertinent to the level of each ritual. This can be further broken down to rituals of purification by recreation. That would be in some sense the Hutan. To rituals to defeat as siblings, which are invoked and propitiated at birth, the Kanda Empat. And to the right-hand side, you see cosmogonic syllables which are used in mantras and which are actually written on the body of Kala during the Ruatan. Now, in the sixth diagram, we can try to sketch out kinship as experienced in a village context. The genealogical depth is never more than 2 generations. And as we see below ego, technonyms are used to describe one's relationship to one's father and mother. On the left, we see that ego contains these Kanda Empat, the umbilical cord, the blood, the Dranixkosia, to whom offerings are made at birth. And on the right-hand side of ego, you see that kinship is inclusive for 1 generation plus or 1 generation minus, but not further. Now contrast that to the kinship in the palaces. In the palaces, we have at the center of our diagram the king, of course, and he is related to Ratu Kidul. And From this relationship, this royal relationship, stems all pretensions to relation to the royal kingship system. This is a tra, as we see below. The tra allows those people who can pretend to this royal kinship to have appanage and farm the taxes back to its king. Now, on the left and the right of the king's body, as it were, the body of the king is a microcosm of the palace itself, as well as that of the kingdom. Let me jump to my conclusion, which is going to be rather brutal, and deliberately so. The epistemological sketch, which went too rapidly, I'm sure, above, may be more appealing to the foreigner than to the Javanese, but they should have provided a justification for not isolating the cult of Durga and Krendowahono from other Pundan. But the big question remains, who is Durga? And for whom? For Bianca and Woodward in the 2015 article, Magical Spiritual Power, have a counterclaim, namely that Laura Kudur was originally not a goddess. They say it is essential to understand that Laura Kudur, who has often been described as a goddess by Jordan and by myself in our writings, is actually a woman who became a spiritual being as a consequence of her ascetic practice. She has many of the attributes of Durga and Parvati, and vice versa, but is now known to be a spiritual being who can assume human form. I have no way of confirming or infirming these affirmations, but they seem to mean that in the context of sexuality and ritual sex in a Muslim Java, the Kashakti of a magical woman has been unveiled. This surprising supposition is intriguing, but probably cannot be verified, at least in Krendowahono. What can be verified is that many people come to the Pundan at occasions totally unrelated to the swearing of the Kerbao, simply because it's a place that's ankara, that's sacred. It is, of course, a female, quote-unquote, Pundan, which is attractive to Javanese. Why? Because the Javanese come to Brazira to fulfill a vow, a cowl, of any order whatsoever, the health of a child, the prosperity of their business. But it does not imply in their manner of praying and offering at the foot of this Pundan any intercourse, verbal or otherwise, any gaul. So by way of conclusion, I'd like to contrast cowl, a vow which one accomplishes at the Pundan, from gaul, which does not occur here as far as I know. Of course, it is difficult to know why people are coming. They will explain to you in very abstract terms the purpose of their visit. But to keep the level of interpretation to that of the peasantry, that of the local people, they are there to fulfill vows for their family or livelihood's well-being. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome questions.
Okay, thank you very much for Professor Headley, who has conveyed many things about the Mahesa Lawung sketch seen from the people class. Yeah. It's very interesting. Monggo, silakan. Ini bisa direspon oleh siapa saja. Itu apakah nilai-nilai Mahesa Lawung juga masih aktual dan apa saja yang mempengaruhi orang untuk untuk tidak melirik kembali Mahesa Lawung seperti pengalaman Pak Stephen Headley seperti yang dulu-dulu. In addition, he also conveyed his experience of living in Krendowahono. Ini kehebatan beliau ya untuk tinggal di sana dan melihat, kemudian menikmati, belajar, dan juga melihat situasi real daripada upacara Mahesa Lawung dengan boleh tidak kalau saya mengistilahkan mendatangkan spirit dari Durga kembali ya. Dan juga disampaikan tadi oleh Prof Headley, everything has changed. Ini semuanya sudah berubah, ya. Ada fungsi bentuk yang sudah dirubah, dan apalagi barangkali mungkin sebagai pancingan dapat saya katakan upacara Mahesa Lawung dengan cerita Durga ini di samping konflik yang ada di sekitaran kita saat ini yang sangat berpengaruh. He said that there should be someone who continue to maintain Mahesa Lawung local wisdom in case and can survive well, not only as a complement of tourism discourse. And Professor Headley also said that there are many artifacts related to Javanese culture around the world that must be preserved, and many become strength. Membuatnya kembali kuat dan bisa mendatangkan speed baru. Ya. Apakah ini juga berkaitan dengan kendala-kendala kuda hitam teknologi yang selalu ini, atau justru itu bisa bersinergi secara eklektis? Furthermore, he also discussed the Javanese ritual mindset in the form of a diagram, many diagram, yeah? Cosmogonic diagrams, very good, that classifies Javanese ritual and the change along with how the mindset affect this change. Very interesting. Gitu. Ini saya kira Prof Headley dengan lapang dada membuka satu ruang perubahan. Prof Headley juga giving an example of the story of Nyiroro Kidul in case, according to Nyiroro Kidul is not God or godness, Headley said that, but is a spiritual figure who can incarnate in human form. So while people who visit Punden to make a pilgrimage in Pundens are a form of agreement between them, the people with their godness. Jadi saya kira ini seperti kita memahami tempat-tempat yang lain juga banyak mitos, mit, dari kata mit yang berarti juga kerinduan manusia kepada yang kodratiah, yang ilahiyah, Tuhan, God di sini. Nah, ini dengan berbagai macam bentuknya sesuai dengan local wisdomnya masing-masing. Alright, next I open the question and answer session for the participants. Silahkan untuk menyampaikan berbagai pertanyaan kepada Pak Headley, dan Pak Headley akan menjawab secara langsung. Itu berupaya ini. Ini ada dari Pak Samsul, Idul Adha question. Is the Mahesa Lawung ritual indicated the reception of Bhatari Durga as metaphysic entity and patroness of Javanese rules within the doctrines of Javanese Tantric Sufism? Ini dari Pak Samsul. Apakah praktik memuja Durga masih ada di Kraton saat ini atau di Pura selain di Surakarta? Itu. Ini ada pertanyaan itu Pak Headley, monggo silahkan. Saya kira juga di chat ada.
I've been very grateful to have participated in these lectures from which I learned so much. It was really very rich for me. I'm only an anthropologist, and I was sent here to do a village monography. Now, I'll try to give some background about this. If we go to the Punden, I was there last week. What do you see? A few people who come for ziarah. One man was washing in the Sumur Seno, the Bhima's well. Obviously, I'm not going to interrupt his ziarah to ask him if there's any connection between the water in the Bhima Suchi Lakon and the water in the Sumur Seno. After that, he sits and does ziarah. So he's accomplishing a vow, kaur. And as I said before, it has nothing to do with Mengauli. It's something very straightforward. And when you study invocations, as what anthropologists do, you get a view of prayer or vows from the bottom up. Now, in my book, I tried to discuss how it became, in a certain sense, the place also of a masjid. Of course, there is a masjid, but the local imam in Kalioso next door came to ziarah there. And so there was an interface. And to make a long story very short, I think the Punden is now a place. It's a place for ziarah. The toko of Durga is absent. Now, how can I say that? Maybe I'm wrong. But last week after the Garbuk Maulid, they had the Mahesa Lawung, which was offered by the Pakubuono's palace. And in all the prayers at the city Ingil, I did not hear, maybe it was said, but I did not hear the name of Durga pronounced. The stress was on the fact that these sajan will reinforce the Kerapatan Keluarga Kraton. That was really what they seemed to be trying to do. Now, when they came to the Punden, they brought a full set of sajan, including a buffalo head. And there was a great deal of focus on the bearing of the buffalo head. So for me, one of the things that's changed is that Durga has faded into some background in this particular Punden, and it's still frequented, just as in the past, by people who come to accomplish a vow for their ziarah. The way I participated in the village was very simple. I didn't do ziarah at the Punden, but I went to Yakar Makam, the Pakshastra Diwirio Almahum, who gave me so much help in the years when I was studying there. And this, of course, was a great pleasure for his family, who accompanied me, and we stayed there together as I spread out the flowers. I went on from studying this one village in this village monarchy to study the Ruwatan, because as I just said, I was very surprised that in the Ruwatan, you find the same prayers in the book the Dalang uses as were used at the Punden. And these prayers, to make a long story again short, are about some kind of recreation, purification through recreation. And this led me further to study invocations. And I did 2 books on the invocations which I was studying, but then I asked friends from Philippines and from other parts of Southeast Asia to contribute books to 2 collective volumes published in the French Review, Lawung, about invocations. In a way, this was very good and very rich, but on the other hand, it was very frustrating because I kept looking for a model, a linguistic model of invocation that would be pragmatics, the way in which people speak one to another. And nothing I found in pragmatics would help me study these invocations further. So I was at a methodological dead end. I apologize, I should have started by that for speaking in English. It's been 15 years since I had come back to Solo. After I left Solo, I began to study invocations in Mosque, a very different place. And in my small dusun in France, there's nobody to speak Indonesian or Javanese with, so the language just disappears. Slowly coming back, but 2 months is not enough time to get it back to a good quality. Anyway, the approach I used, finally, was that of a very famous French sociologist, Louis Dumont, who worked in India, in Tamil Nadu, in the very south. And he talked about englobement, how a hierarchy of values encompasses, and this is what my diagrams were meant to show, the whole ritual and mythological geography. And in each one of the koyal, each one of the temples in Tamil Nadu, things are somewhat different. And this reflects the sociology of this group which he was working with. So I think that the study of a hierarchy of values, the study of exchange of values, the study of the permutations of a hierarchy of values is a very good way, not the only way, but a very good way to study the changes which are now taking place in Javanese adat. My friends in Solo say, the adat is not the same. They change it. They manipulate it. Is that good or bad? I don't know. So things are changing. Many things stay the same. The place of the Punden is still a place for ziyarah for local people, but the outside influences are very strong. This year in the Mahesa Lawung, I didn't see any participation by the Mangkanagaran. Now, a rather coarse kasar interpretation of this would say, well, they're busy doing other things. Right next to Krendowahono, right next to Kaliosa, there's a huge menorah cigarette factory. It's huge. And they employ lots and lots of people from the neighboring villages. So, of course, this can only have a big impact. And so Solo is not far away. It's become, in a certain sense, only in a certain sense, a suburb, an economic suburb of Solo. Now, I wouldn't begin to try to explain the impact of this on the Punden, but it's sure that as soon as the Mahesa Lawung started to take place, it was available live on television, and that can only influence people's understanding. At the city Ingil, when the prayers were said over the Sajan in the palace, again, this may sound critical, but it's meant to be neutral. There were long prayers, much longer than usual. The Abdi Dalam, not many of them were holding their hands in prayer like one does. Some of them were even busy watching something on their telephone. And the atmosphere was much less solemn than what I had known in the past. Again, a Javanese friend said, well, this is the third generation of Abdi Dalam from what you may have known in the past, so it's not exactly the same mentality. All this small anecdotes are meant simply to give us a way of coming to not analyze or theorize the Mahesa Lawung, but saying that things have changed radically from my point of view as a foreigner. And it suffices to be away for 10 years from Solo to lose any real intuition about what is happening. But this is what I saw beginning 50 years ago now, when I was living in Krendowahono. And I do thank you for your attention and your questions.
Thank you, Prof. Headley. Oke, memang saya setuju bahwa semuanya serba mengalami perubahan ya. Yang menarik tadi dari aspek ekonomi, aspek tourism, aspek di luar aspek sosiokultural yang terjadi di upacara Mahesa Lawung itu. Dan juga ada perubahan sekarang rokok menoro beberapa waktu yang lalu memang sempat down, sudah banyak yang kena PHK. So itu juga satu kesulitan tertentu dan sekarang tampaknya sudah mulai bangkit. Juga dukungan dari masyarakat adat ya, yang terutama sekarang masih ada oleh Gus Timung itu juga masih dilakukan. Namun pembiayaan juga saya dengar memang cukup berat, masih membebani karena Kraton sudah tidak lancar lagi menghasilkan pemasukan, maksudnya uang ya yang masuk ke Kraton sehingga tidak cukup selain ada konflik isu-isu tentang konflik itu. Oke, mungkin juga ini saya mohon maaf speak in Indonesia because ini mungkin bisa memancing peserta untuk banyak bertanya. Juga mungkin respon modern bahwa yang kreatif, yang mencoba untuk melepaskan diri dari tekanan kultur yang lama dengan mencoba mengambil sedikit bagian dari Mahesa Lawung, upacara Mahesa ataupun ikon Durga itu sebagai apa ya? Sebagai materi untuk menghasilkan karya-karya baru. Selain upacara itu sendiri juga saya kira mungkin Durga menjadi satu genre musik baru, Durga menjadi satu merek fashion ya, baru. Nah, itu respon-respon yang sekarang ini mulai dicari. Jadi mahasiswa-mahasiswa saya tertarik Mahesa Lawung, upacara itu. My student is interesting in Mahesa Lawung ceremony, not in the power of his tradition, but the value of tradition, and they trying to growing the value, that value to be a new product in the modern era. Jadi mereka membuat merek-merek baju menjadi genre-genre musik yang baru, ya mungkin menjadi genre apa? Satu jenis kuliner. Apa ini kuliner Mahesa Lawung? Nah, itu kan menjadi kafe-kafe sekarang ini, karena di Solo sekarang banyak kafe. Jadi Solo kota kafe dengan internet gratis. Itu juga terjadi. Baik, ini ada pertanyaan dari Ibu Dewi Yulianti. Selamat siang, Prof. Saya Dewi Yulianti dari Isi Denpasar. Apakah ada ritual selain ritual Mahesa Lawung di Kraton Kasunanan Solo, di Hutan Krendowahono, Kabupaten Karanganyar, sebagai manifestasi penghormatan kepada Bhatari Durga selama ratusan tahun? Jadi, Prof, Bu Yulianti bertanya, adakah upacara lain selain Mahesa Lawung? Dan utamanya, bagaimana masyarakat memahami ritual tersebut? Mungkin ini diakronis dari waktu ke waktu. Thank you. Silakan, Prof.
The other rituals that take place in the palace, I do not know much about. There was always the ritual when the Bakabuwana went to the top of this tall tower in the center of the palace and slept there one night. And people said, and why not believe it, that he was visited by Loro Kidul. And of course, there was no way that I could come along and watch. So about that, I know almost nothing. To my knowledge, the ritual offerings in front of the king's throne, which also take place in the Mankana Garden, I filmed that actually. I found that very interesting. They made Sajan to Shri, and she's lying there invisibly on a bed, and each Thursday night they change her necklace. Her flower necklace is faded since last week, so they give her a fresh flower necklace. What importance does this have in the Mankana Garden? It's hard for me to say. I only have impressions, fleeting impressions. The same week, they had a big festival in the Mankana Garden Palace in the perspective of wonderful Indonesia to glorify the existence of the palace in its past. That seemed to me a bit Bollywood, but I shouldn't say that because I also went to Pangadak, the place on Gunung Lawu where the princes of Mankana Garden are buried. And there, the atmosphere was sangat ikhlas, very angker, and retained all of its value. Now, the word tradition is a useful word. It's very interesting that in Greek, paradosis means a gift from another person to you. So, but its very nature, traditions change, they evolve, they become poorer, they become richer, they change altogether. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that traditions change. One can regret the commercialization of certain things, but one's regret doesn't change the daily reality. But I think the bottom-up approach, that's the point I'm trying to make in my talk, the bottom-up approach, starting from people living in a given place in a given time, and what they do and what they say, and how they do vows, how they do. This is a good way, which doesn't mean that the very rich and fascinating studies of old inscriptions and old Nazca isn't interesting. But what I like about the anthropological approach is you're talking to living people and the information comes out of a dialogue with them. And you ask them a question, they answer it sometimes very well, sometimes they don't see it, they find it very interesting. But it's a living response from a daily reality. And for an anthropologist, that's where we start.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Headley. Ini ada satu pertanyaan lagi. Menurut Prof. Headley, do ritual practice like Mahesa Lawung take place anywhere other than Kraton? Apakah praktek memuja Durga ya, itu juga terjadi selain di Kraton atau Pura di Surakarta? Menurut pengalaman Prof. Adi bagaimana? Silakan.
I may be wrong, and there's certainly rituals made by other palaces in Kediri or in Jogja or elsewhere in East Java, about which I know nothing. That's the problem of working in a village. You only know what's local. The talk yesterday about Calcutta fascinated me because the Durga Puja, I've been there at the time of the Durga Puja. It's absolutely mammoth. In what way does it relate to anything in Java? Well, let's put Durga aside. The sajan are dilarong ake, are given over to the waves of the river or the ocean. Just like in Java, you give the sajan to the water and it floats away. So that's one similarity. But of course, any comparison with India is direct comparison is difficult because in the 8th century, a devotional movement called Bhakti spread from South India, from Tamil Nadu, all the way over to Bangladesh and all the way to the northwest, and changed the nature of their prayers. We didn't need Brahmin. We didn't need to recite the text from in Sanskrit from long ago. They just went and prayed. And these prayers are extremely well preserved. When you go into a koil in Tamil Nadu, often it's not. The prayers are written on stone, and those who do not know them by heart will read them as they go in the temple and use them as their prayers. So that's the impact of a written tradition. And I cannot begin to describe how important it is. In my book, The Hidden Ear of God, there's a whole chapter, as well as in the following book, Rivers of Ritual, on this Bhakti movement. Now, the impact of written prayers, or writing in general, on the Mahesa Lawung seems to me almost zero. Of course, just like the Dalang, they have the pakam of the Lakon, they have a pakam of the prayers, and they bring them and they read them. They don't know them by heart. So written tradition is not the moving power behind the ritual. The sajan, yes, they're much the same, I suppose. But what does change, and this is an obvious affirmation, is the mentality of the people. And the substrata of Hindu, Buddhism, and Islam, which you know much more about than I do, of course, is Kebatinan. And the Kebatinan mentality and the coordinates, the epistemology, which is not written out, but simply in people's minds, I tried to lay out in these 5 diagrams which we just looked at, which for me is a kind of epistemology. When you build a house, you don't have to look at a bawokan to know what colors you should envelop each pillar with. It's just something which is part of common knowledge. And it seems to me that, as far as I know, is not changing. People still do the same ritual offerings for the Kanda Empat, and that in the center of Solo, just as in the villages. By way of conclusion, I apologize because all the other talks are so rich and so interesting, and my perspective is pelosok, and I think that's good.
Yeah, very interesting, Prof. Headley. Baik, sebelum ada pertanyaan lain, mungkin dari saya, Prof. Jadi Saya setuju. I'm agree that belajar tentang masa lalu itu bisa memperkuat kita untuk melihat lebih jelas masa depan. Jadi saya kira studi-studi seperti ini sangat penting untuk bisa melihat state of the art kita dari dulu sampai sekarang dan bagaimana perkembangan itu telah terjadi. Tetapi memang Prof, saya punya 60 mungkin 60 lebih begitu mahasiswa tiap tahun yang selalu tertarik dengan mitos, dengan cerita lama, ya, apalagi dari bidang filologi. Mahasiswa, my student is very interesting, ya, to study in that area. Namun saya melihat mereka mengambilnya tidak seperti yang istilahnya mereka mungkin konvensional, ya, cara yang konvensional memahaminya, karena ketiadaan akar, tidak ada lagi akar yang bisa menyambungkan cerita-cerita Durga itu dengan masa yang sekarang. Mungkin karena pendidikan faktornya dan juga mungkin kesempatan. Di masa pandemik kita ada kehilangan waktu bahwa orang dan tempat-tempat itu tidak lagi dikunjungi, gitu. Bagaimana menurut Prof. Headley tentang fenomena ini, di mana anak muda itu mengambil dengan cara yang lain, gitu. Mereka bisa mendapatkan kekuatan itu, power dari cerita itu dan masih berpengaruh di sini, tetapi keluarnya dalam bentuk seni atau kreatif yang lain. Saya kira ini pertanyaan dari Mbak Yulianti itu saya perpanjang. Bagaimana masyarakat memahami ritual-ritual seperti itu, dan ternyata ada perbedaan yang sangat signifikan sekarang. Gitu. Kalau kita lihat karya-karya mahasiswa, saya pakai mahasiswa saya, dan bagaimana saya mencoba mengenalkan mereka dengan sastra-sastra era Jawa kuno, era Jawa Tengahan, era Jawa Baru, dan mereka sungguh takjub. Mereka senang sekali bicara tentang negara kertagama, bicara tentang Sotasoma mereka. Hanya bagaimana kita packaging ini. Nah, terkait dengan case in Mahesa Lawung, do you have an idea about the phenomena changing seperti ini? Jadi generasi muda mau mengambil itu, still have a same spirit to study itu, tetapi dengan cara yang lain. Keluarnya itu dengan produk-produk ini. Bagaimana menurut Prof. Headley? Thank you.
For me, there are two kinds of studies. There's the philological study, which is very important. I did a translation of the Prajna Vinishya Siddhi, which is a tantric text in Sanskrit for my diploma. And it was doing that made me start to do anthropology, because as fascinating as it was, I found it was univocal. There was not two voices, just one. And so I thought, I really want to talk to people and hear what they have to say. Now, that's different from mythology. Mythology has a long life. The ancient Greek mythology from the 6th, 7th centuries BC, very ancient, is still alive and well in European culture, in French culture. They portray the myths in theater, in dance, and it's very, very, very strong. So I think that in many countries, not all countries perhaps, mythology has a long life. The texts, Zultmutter's famous book about the old forms of belief in Shaivism, in the Kidung, etc., is absolutely fascinating and a great pleasure to read, but it doesn't make you participate in the teachings, in spite of perhaps your desires, as does mythology. The mythology is behind almost all rituals, and it's in a certain sense gives the reader, the hearer, a livelier understanding. Now, you can say that's not true. I went to a Wayang the other day, and many of the younger people had no idea what the story was, that they hadn't read the Pakum. They couldn't understand the long dialogues at Checharan, because they were in some kind of old Javanese, or anyway, it was too halus for them to understand. And there's a fascinating book recently published by Catherine Emerson at National University Press in Singapore, which discusses the way contemporary Dalang are presenting in theater, wayang, old myths, but making them more accessible, shortening the long introduction and bringing it into a perspective which involves the young people and their daily lives. So this is a fascinating book. I cannot recommend it as more than that.
Recording in progress.
Spiritual work in Solo and other places, and which are, in a way, the foundation of Javanese spiritual sensitivities.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Headley. Prof. Headley, ada pertanyaan banyak nih, jadi saya sampaikan. Mohon maaf, Prof. Pemilihan kepala kerbau untuk sajen dari kerbau itu apakah ada pertimbangan khusus? Kenapa harus kepala kerbau? Karena di beberapa seni tradisi yang lain, kadang juga ada sajen yang sama. Ya, kepala kerbau. Kenapa enggak kepala hewan yang lain? Misalnya, wayang, ya, naik atap rumah dan seterusnya. Itu jadi menarik sekali. Kenapa kepala kerbau? Itu. Ini dulu, Prof. Nanti setelah itu ada pertanyaan lain dari silakan, Prof. Kenapa kepala kerbau?
To be perfectly honest, I have no idea. I have no idea. But as I said briefly in passing, kerbau sacrifices are very important in southern India. They attach the kerbau to a yupa that stands there in the village year in and out, and they sacrifice them. They protect the village boundaries, as do these big horses mounted by gods, which are on the borders. And of course, as I said also, they existed in Borneo. Now, more than that, I do not know. Where in Borneo? Was it the Dayak, was the coastal peoples? I don't know, but these stone posts, and I cannot recommend more this book by Madeleine Biardot, L'Histoire de Pierre, the story of the post, because having done a great deal of research in the Purana and the Mahabharata, she went to southern India and walked around the villages and looked at things, which I find, she was an old lady then, she was very courageous and did a lot of good ethnography. So ethnography and philology are complementary.
Ya, thank you. Ya, memang satu hal kecil yang perlu ini mungkin ini simbol, ya, mungkin ada lambang atau simbol yang khusus. Dan saya pernah mendengar kenapa kepala kerbau, karena kalau versi Kraton itu kerbau itu binatang yang bodoh gitu. Jadi ini ritual untuk menghilangkan kebodohan gitu. Jadi saya kira kenapa kerbau, ya juga ini kan juga ada kayak selama ada relasi dengan itu. Kenapa justru orang-orang yang memiliki kelebihan khusus itu justru dirawat di keraton gitu. Yang bodoh, yang gini-gini juga dirawat di keraton karena itu untuk sebagai simbol keraton itu melindungi dan menghilangkan kebodohan. Katanya seperti itu, Bro. Yeah.
Of course, in India, in the iconography which also exists in Java, the asura that are fighting the gods take the form of a demon, and the demon, when Durga kills it, comes out of his mouth, and we see him in the sculptures. And I think the other kinds of sacrifices of kerbau in Borneo, for instance, probably have nothing to do with this. And Why they choose the kabau, I don't know. It's a very precious animal. If you're doing rice culture, it's a very big animal. But these are all very commonsensical suggestions in the topic merits research.
Ya, ya bro, saya bisa memahami. Selanjutnya ada pertanyaan Prof. Headley, mohon maaf, dari Ibu Diana Butler. Nah, ini sahabat kita, Bu Diana Butler. Beliau dari Kajian Budaya FIB Universitas Udayana, dia doktor yang senior di sana. Dia mengatakan begini, Prof. Kemarin pada pidato kebudayaan Dr. Ni Wayan Aryati, beliau beberapa kali mengatakan bahwa tradisi Bali Hindu, dalam tradisi Bali Hindu, seorang harus hati-hati, be careful untuk mengucapkan nama Durga, hati-hati. Sepertinya ada ide bahwa bersuara nama itu akan memancing, akan memicu satu kewujudan. Jadi Durga akan wujud kalau dibicarakan buruk mungkin. Nah, dia bertanya, apakah Prof. Headley merasa ada perspektif itu dalam tradisi budaya di Jawa? Itu, apakah ada perspektif itu? Maka nama Durga tidak diucapkan atau kadangkali disebut dengan nama samaran lain, nama yang berbeda. Apakah hal itu untuk menjaga agar sifat Durga hanya dipakai pada tempat dan waktu yang tepat? Jadi seringkali Durga tidak disampaikan, tidak diucapkan, karena hati-hati. Apakah itu juga terjadi di Jawa? Silakan, Bro. Menarik sekali.
The name Durga means difficult to approach. Durga in Sanskrit, 2 words, too difficult to approach. And she is difficult to approach because she is khuda, she is violent, destructive. Now, what seems to me, but maybe I'm wrong, different from India is the very clear complementarity of a peaceful appearance of the goddess and a violent khuda appearance of the goddess. So to say the goddess's name is to make it appear. You do not want to be confronted with a horrible, violent goddess. Now, that's for India. Now, in Java, I don't know, because people very rarely talk about Durga. And even during the Mahesa Lawung, I had the impression that the Sajan were the key to the accessibility of this Pundan Ankar. And the biography, mythological biography of Durga seems to me to be absent. Now, clearly in Bali, that's not the case. But in Central Java, maybe, this is just a suggestion, a low profile Durga allows things to go forward. Anyway, all over the world, in Western Europe, in the Masmur, in the Psalms, to say the name of God is to make him present. It's also true, of course, in Islam. So the sacred quality of the name of God is because he immediately is present if you say it. Now, how the Javanese make sense of this, I have no idea, but it's a good question to have your students explore.
Thank you, Fadli. Prof. Headley, memang kalau dan budaya barangkali kalau kita melihat berbagai macam artefak kuno, we know that in Mataram kuno, Kahuripan, and sampai Majapahit era, itu Durga selalu dihormati karena dia menimbulkan satu kekuatan. Jadi ini satu mitologi yang sangat kuat gitu ya. Tetapi memang agak sedikit berbeda dan itu mungkin berbalik ya. Kalau kita melihat dari versi wayang kulit, di mana Bhatara Durga itu justru dimusuhi ya karena ada di pihak Korawa sebagai simbol dari kejahatan ataupun yang hal-hal yang sifatnya tidak baik. Oleh karena itu mungkin ini juga satu problem sendiri yang tampak berubah. Jadi pemahamannya menjadi berubah oleh alam ini atau oleh waktu. Nah, ini ada pertanyaan begini, Prof. Ini dari Pak Reddy ya. Dari Pak Reddy. Dia mengatakan, Prof, apakah mitologi ini bisa dipakai sebagai media mitigasi dalam konteks atau aspek nation, kebangsaan, terutama pada hal authenticity dari sebuah ruang. Jadi apakah mitos ini bisa dipakai sebagai media mitigasi ya dalam aspek kebangsaan, terutama pada hal authenticity dari sebuah ruang. Silakan.
You know much better than I do that in the 19th century, in the 20th century, every place had its own dimit, its own spirit. Some of them are made more prominent because they become the object of worship in the temple. Others become more prominent because, well, is it very different? The reputation, the reputation of the kuburan of the wali in all over Central and Eastern Java, there should be some exploration about the connection between kuburan and angker. We all venerate our ancestors, our fathers and mothers' grave sites. We put flowers on their graves, etc. But it would seem to me that the role of the local spirits, the dimit, is fading into the past. And that may be confirmed by the fact that, again, if I'm not wrong, Durga's reputation is fading. Now, how you meditate, there are many ways, and people are here to suggest how we should meditate. You find this on the television, you find this everywhere. I think meditation is a very serious business. The word in English has a very strong ascetical. It means fasting, it means silence, it means quiet, no thoughts, filtering the thoughts and all this, which is the same probably in Java. But it's an interior phenomenon you cannot describe from the outside. There's an expression which I like. In France, we say, a woman's beauty is not on the outside, a woman's beauty is in her heart. That's where her beauty lies. Well, the same may be said of people who go to do sembahyang or ziarah. The purity of their practice, of their intention, lies inside themselves and is totally invisible to the outside world.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Once again, one question from Francisca Vernet. Francisca Vernet ini ada sebuah komentar from the artist dan dia sangat menggemari Durga. Gitu. Beliau mengatakan, it might be possible that the bull's head is chosen because in the mythos, Durga could defeat King Mahesa who changed into the form of a bull. Jadi memang kalau kita lihat semua arca Durga di Jawa itu merepresentasikan sosok Durga Mahesa ini ya. Dan itu mengapa mungkin ada kepala kerbau di situ karena ada cerita tentang perang antara Durga dengan Raja Mahesa yang dimenangkan mutlak oleh Durga. Bagaimana pendapat Prof?
As you know, in India, every god has its own, I don't know how to say in English, what he rides is different. Shiva rides Nandi, great big bull, quiet, peaceful bull. The Ashura attack in Indian mythology the newly created goddess Durga, with this wild bull, out of whose mouth comes the. Now, you used the word mitigation just now. I misunderstood. I heard meditation. What is mitigated? The danger? What do I understand by mitigate? Please explain to me. I don't think I quite understood your question. The previous question.
Oh, ini pertanyaan sebelumnya, Prof.
I was trying to understand what you meant by the word mitigation. In your previous question, you used the word mitigation, which I misunderstood. I could not hear clearly, and I heard meditation. But what did you mean by mitigation?
Oh, ya. Ini pertanyaan dari Reddy tentang mitigasi tadi ya, Prof ya. Jadi kita menunggu respon dari penanya, Prof. Ya, what mitigation do you mean, kan, Prof? Itu.
To mitigate in English, if that's what she meant, I don't know, is to soften the impact of something, to make it more gentle, to make it less harsh. And of course, that's nothing to do with meditation. It's a different word. I don't know how to answer the question about mitigation. I apologize.
Ya, Prof. Kemudian, Prof, ini masih ada waktu sedikit, Prof. Kalau it might be possible that the bull itu karena King Mahesa Sura, kata Francisca Venet tadi. Oh, itu karena Durga bisa mengalahkan King Mahesa Sura atau raksasa Asyura. Prof tadi menjelaskan. Tapi di sisi lain ada beberapa manuskrip yang menjelaskan raksasa Asyura, Mahesa Sura itu juga berkepala gajah, juga berkepala macan, juga berkepala mungkin wajah manusia. Itu artinya normal seperti manusia, tidak berkepala hewan. Itu juga dia seorang pemain senjata pedang yang hebat. Tapi kenapa yang dipilih kerbau? Nah, maka saya pernah bertanya dengan Gusti Buker. Gusti Buker menjawab, anggap saja, Gusti Buker said that, anggap saja itu kepala kerbau adalah kebodohan. Katanya begitu. Tetapi karena mungkin tidak ada deskripsi yang lain ya. Karena dia bisa berubah apapun gitu ya. Selain kerbau gitu. Tetapi kalau kita melihat ukiran di Candi Penataran, itu di situ memang tampak kerbau atau binatang-binatang lokal itu dominan. Itu apakah kenapa dipilih kerbau? Karena memang binatang-binatang itu dominan dan menjadi semacam binatang yang paling akrab dengan masyarakat lokal Jawa itu. Saya kurang tahu, Prof. Itu. Baik, Prof. Ini sangat menarik sekali. Jadi waktunya mungkin sudah hampir habis. Dan Prof, sebelum saya mengakhiri diskusi ini, barangkali ada closing statement dari Prof.
Bury the head of the Krobal to the south of the Pundan. It's very, very clear. That's where they're burying it. Nowhere else. Each year they dig another hole and another head is put in. Whereas the sajen to Lorikidul are put on a kind of a bamboo tray and floated off in the waves. These are very different ways of making an offering. The village rituals, of course, in Islamatan, having made the offerings, they all participate, the whole village. They sit around afterwards and eat them. That's another way of disposing of the offerings. Anyway, you have so many interesting questions in your students. I think we'll gain a great deal from doing field research. But we do this in France. My daughter is a professor of social anthropology, specializing in southern India. And she just went to Karachi in Pakistan and was helping some Pakistani students to learn how to do visual archives. And in France, we all ask all the students to do a 2-week or a 3-week fieldwork to get a better understanding of how to do it. This last summer, there were 14 students that came to my small village of 200 people, and they did fieldwork. They went around and asked questions. Sometimes they got good answers. Sometimes the whole thing was too awkward to expect good answers. So I think the way forward is not only to study old manuscripts, which shows us what once existed and where the present practice came from, but also to do research on the, not necessarily on secularization. Secularization is a very attractive topic and it's very fashionable, but simply on what is practiced today. And again, I said this before, I think to begin in the villages is very interesting. And some villages are very different from other villages. A friend of mine is doing photography this week in Katup, north of Ceylon. And there are many interesting things there. Some of them are disappearing, some of them are holding on, and some of them are being renewed, but we need to know how. How is it done? And your students are the future of our understanding.
Okay, thank you. Time is ini mau lagi terus tapi waktunya sudah tidak cukup. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have get too many information about Durga and Mahesa Lawung ceremony from Professor Stephen Headley. Very, very good information. And it turns out that there are available good explanation from inside or outside Java, Indonesia. Jadi ternyata masing-masing ada relasi yang bisa menjelaskan tentang itu dan kenapa itu memiliki kekuatan. Bukan hanya kekuatan, tapi daya hidup yang kuat yang telah tumbuh dan hidup hingga berabad-abad. We learn a lot from what was conveyed by Prof. Stephen Headley. Semoga punya manfaat yang baik. Semoga bisa membuat kita menjadi lebih bersemangat untuk belajar tentang masa lalu, untuk mendapatkan kekuatan yang selalu baru pada masa yang akan datang. Semoga semuanya sehat, semua selamat, semuanya sejahtera. Salam dari Solo, di mana Prof sekarang tinggal di Solo, Prof. Stephen Headley tinggal di Hotel Dana Solo. Dari saya apabila ada kekurangan, saya mohon maaf yang sebesar-besarnya. Selamat siang, selamat beristirahat, dan terima kasih. Saya kira cukup.